Okay, so to start off, I'm going to show you a method called sighting. I use this all the time. It's really handy when you're drawing from life. So here I am. I'm holding my pencil up to the skull, and I want the end of the pencil to reach the edge of the skull there to the right. And then I use my thumb and index finger to kind of hold at the end of the object. So that is the measurement of the skull. You do have to extend your arm fully and kind of lock it at the elbow. And here's the width that I measured. I just kept my fingers locked there, and I'm comparing it to the height. So the height is a little bit taller than the width. So I'm just going to move my measurements to the height just to double check again. But you can measure a lot of things, and the closer you are to the object, the easier it is to get more measurements, especially an object like this. It's kind of a smaller object. So here's the width again, and was just comparing those two. So I know now that the width is a little bit shorter than the height. The height is taller. So here I am trying to get a measurement for the bottom of the nose. And I'm just going to check it, but I have a feeling it's about halfway in the skull, the bottom of that nasal passage, that opening there. And I'm checking it, and it's like, oh, yep, that's about right. If you divide it in half, that's where it is. Okay, so at this stage you should already have a toned background. You can see mine's already up there. So what I'm doing now is I'm beginning to draw just the outer shape of the skull. And I'm using Vine charcoal for this. Vine charcoal is lighter and it's not as dark as compressed charcoal. It's going to leave a mark that is easily erased. In fact, you can just wipe it out very efficiently. So it's a good tool to use in the initial process where we're trying to draw the skull and get the features and the proportions all correct. So I'm looking at the skull, I'm observing it from life, just like you'll be doing, and I'm drawing kind of a grid line on top to represent the center of the face vertically. So if you're not seeing the skull right across from you, opposite to you, you might see it at what's called a three-quarter view. That's when it's partially turned. You should draw it exactly how you see it. So the one I'm working on is actually a three-quarters. It's just a slight three-quarters. So just draw it from your point of view. Don't try and make it look like it's from the front on. The three-quarters is a little bit trickier, but it's also a little bit more interesting. The view from the side is also a little bit easier than doing the three-quarters, but again, the three-quarters is interesting to look at. It feels like somebody is going to turn and talk to you. It just is a little bit more engaging. A lot of portraits are done that way. So I'm getting the cheekbone in there, and I'm fitting these pieces together as though it were a puzzle. I'm trying to figure out where does that fit, how does that shape look, and then I keep comparing it to the skull that I'm looking at. So I pause a lot, I look, I try and compare little areas. I don't try and look at the whole thing at once at this point. I'm just like gazing back and forth. And that's the skull I'm working from. So once you have the proportions where you want them, what you should do is you next take your 2B pencil and go over them. And I'm doing this in kind of a broken line because I want to lose some of the edges. I don't want it to have hard edges all the way around. I think I explained to you guys too that if you go too dark and you press too much on your charcoal pencil, you can make your drawing look flat because you have a dark outline. So you ultimately don't want a dark outline. However, on this one, we're going to be using the chamois and we'll be wiping out some of it. But still, maybe try using a broken line so it's not a outline all the way around. So I'm just trying to make sure that when I go to wipe it out, I don't lose all my detail because then I'll have to redraw it all over again. And there is some little intricate stuff in there on the jaw and the mandible and the teeth too. I didn't quite draw all the detail yet in the teeth. I just kind of blocked out where the teeth will eventually go. It is a lot of work. There's lots of detail, no doubt about it. And I really want you to try hard to get it right in this stage before you go on to shading it. The worst thing that can happen is for you to have a drawing and for there to be mistakes in the drawing and then you get to fully shading it only to realize the mistakes once you shaded it. That's a lot harder to fix. So it's good to spend some time on it and try and get it as close as possible. Okay, so now you can go ahead and take your chamois and you can gently wipe. You don't want to wipe out too much or you're going to have nothing there. So it should be a very pale outline. And you can kind of redraw some of the lines back in if you need them. But it's a really light outline that you'll have left on that paper. And we're only going to be using the charcoal pencil today. We're not going to be using the white charcoal, so only the black. So I'm just redrawing in some of those features, make sure I have it. And then you can lightly start to shade in your darker areas. And remember, it's always best to go a little bit lighter than you think at first. So I'm just lightly shading it. It's with a 2B, lightly shading it in. So you look for the giant areas of shadow. And I think I told you this, but I tend to work from dark to light. So I'm going for the shadow areas first and filling those in. You will need to get a cast shadow. You notice probably that there is a kind of a long one there to the left, slightly blocked in, but you'll go and address that in a little bit. So you're going to work on the shadows today. And we'll work our way from the shadows to the midtones and then to the highlights. But your job is to try and get it as accurate as possible. So take time. When you look inside that nasal cavity, there's some funny stuff going on there. Make sure you include that stuff too. Interesting how the nose kind of looks like an upside down heart. Anyway, that's what you're going to be focusing on today. You're going to be working on primarily the shadows.